I wanted to talk about the creative process. How can we create something together? It seems so simple, but whenever there are two or more people involved, we're going to tackle something called ego. We've heard this word so much, and maybe it's lost all meaning to you, but just try to do something together that is more than one person in the room, because if it's just you, there is not going to be much debate about anything. It's all your ego, and though there may be different personalities involved, inside your head, the singer, the guitarist, the bassist, they are all encapsulated by the one ego. They all ate the same food and they all woke up at the same time and they all went to sleep together. But let's consider that there are actually two people trying to come up with something. One of them smoked pot and one of them drank a whole lot of coffee. They're going to have some difficulties creating something, not just because of what they ate and not just because they have two separate egos, that is, two separate auras surrounding them. They're also transmitting and receiving two very different energetic vibrations. To put it shortly and simply, one is on downers and one is on uppers. But this can also be due to differences in their waking hours. That is, one person woke up, got all tidy, and marched into the studio, and the other is just barely keeping his eyes open. He's been up all night. It could also be due to astrological issues. If the two signs don't match in a particular date, there is going to be trouble, if that is, they don't follow the steps described here. This was a general introduction. Perhaps understanding what the ego is in relevance to your personality and energetic vibe would take more practice, determination, and experience, since most people hardly ever take the time to distinguish themselves from their ego. Take a look at how many poor people are going through the garbage around you, if you catch my drift. But I'm sure that there is reading and watching material that can answer these questions elsewhere. There are, of course, a multitude of excellent books on the subject, as this, separating yourself from the ego, is what most wise men and women have been trying to do for the past several millennia. It's also, in essence, what all religions are talking about. But for the sake of this topic, and what I plan to talk about, let's concentrate on how the ego manifests itself in context to the creative process. Which, by the way, is a term I'm not fond of, creative process, as if there is a need to separate the process from creativity. As if there is a creative spark and then it's processed. No, it doesn't work like that. Creativity itself is the process. Sparks are merely the first of three stages required to bring something into actuality, but this is really not the topic right now. So, how does the ego manifest itself in this context? Likes and dislikes. Suppose two people are working on a song in the studio. We'll call one Albert and the other one Todd. Albert has spent all night working on a chord progression and a bass riff. He plays it to Todd, and much to everyone's dismay, Todd doesn't like it. So Albert likes something and Todd doesn't. This is something that Albert hasn't expected at all. Him and his ego are experiencing a strong negative vibration, an emotional and energetic ouch. Todd, however, is absolutely convinced that he is correct, and the chord progression and bass riff presented by the former do indeed, to put it mildly, suck. In fact, if just one note would be changed, everything would be perfect. But Albert already tried that one note last night, and he thinks that that choice would be, to put it mildly, cheesy. However, as this is such a common occurrence, as this is something that every musician or artist has experienced, they would not talk about it. Now begins a very fearsome yet very subtle battle of the egos. Who is correct? Who is wrong? They obviously can't both be. Putting the battle of the ego aside, the room would suddenly be filled with strong energetic fluctuations. Their spirits and minds are battling just like Neo and a multitude of Agent Smiths, and by the way, each one of them is convinced that the other one is the multitude, and he is the one and only who would bring peace and prosperity to the land of pop culture. The winner, in all cases, would be the person with the higher energy, in terms of magnitude. You could call him the one who is more active, proactive, dominant, etc. The loser would be the one who is more passive, reclusive, gentle, but these are just words which describe the eternal battle of spirits. Though in the greater scheme of things, there are more than two spirits. It's like yin and yang, which manifest themselves in a more prismatic way. Now, to overcome this very subtle thing, which has become so apparent and yet so invisible to everyone, takes two things. The first, as I've mentioned, is separating yourself from your ego. That would mean, on the energetic level, that you are not reacting based on this sensation that you have experienced, that you are right and the other person is wrong. That is what they sometimes do in debating courses, where the two sides are asked to switch sides, to speak out for the cause or goal of the opposite side. But this trick can only get you so far in art and in general, as art doesn't really have sides. Personalities and egos, they have sides. Your side and my side. But I wish to suggest a second option. It's a bit more complicated, but can also make things a bit easier in the long run. It's borrowed from the fields of linguistics and cognitive psychology and a few more, in which we try to use words to describe mental processes. One of the things that become more in use the more you start spreading your creative work around is the use of keywords. You see, when you were listening to your favorite band as a teenager, and perhaps more so when you were playing an instrument as a very, very young child, you weren't really thinking about keywords. You knew that Pink Floyd and Beatles can be generalized as rock and roll, maybe even progressive rock. But it didn't get much further. When you are uploading your tracks to a major website or social network, however, things can get tricky. You very suddenly have to describe your most original creation, which absolutely sounds like nothing else, in keywords. As painful as it is, the better you are at it, the more audience you're likely to attract. My point is, why wait for when uploading the song? What if Albert and Todd were to describe keywords already when you're in the studio? What if you gave each other grades, say from 1 to 10 or 100, in terms of its closeness to the keyword which describes what you're aiming for? That would solve several things. First, you can get an overview of your aims and goals. Suppose you each wrote all the favorite artists which influenced you on a large Bristol paper and you started drawing lines and circles to see where they meet. Would that be completely terminative to your artistic ambitions? Or is it once again, in all its glory, ego and habits manifesting themselves, trying to replicate a certain partial image of a band working in the studio that you saw some while ago, maybe in a movie? Obviously, the goal is not to get your work to sound like something. Nobody likes it, especially the audience, when things start to sound like something else. But I think that if we simply reverse the process of the usage of keywords, instead of something that happens after the work is uploaded, to something that happens before one note is recorded, it could solve the energetic fluctuations from ever occurring.